can't be. Where are my rings? It could only have been him.
I was standing in front of my empty safe, staring at the velvet box that should have held my wedding rings, when I realized my son had stolen 40 years of my marriage to fund a romantic getaway to Paris with his wife. I called my lawyer before I called him. By the time Brandon's plane landed at Charles de Gaulle, he'd already been removed from my will, his access to the family trust frozen, and eviction notices filed on the 2 properties I owned that he'd been managing. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me back up and explain how my own flesh and blood became a thief who'd sell his mother's most precious possessions like they were garage sale junk. It started 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning that seemed perfectly ordinary. I'm Margaret, 64 years old, and I'd just returned from my morning walk through the neighborhood where I'd lived for 38 years. My husband Daniel had passed 2 years prior after a sudden heart attack, and I was still adjusting to the quiet of a house that had once been filled with his laughter, his terrible singing in the shower, his presence. The safe was in our bedroom closet, behind a panel that Daniel had installed himself back in 1987. Inside were the important documents, some cash for emergencies, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and most importantly, my wedding rings. Not the rings themselves, actually. I wore those every single day. But the original rings from our first wedding, before we renewed our vows on our 25th anniversary and upgraded. Those original rings represented broke newlyweds who had more love than money, who'd scraped together everything they had for 2 simple gold bands that cost less than our first month's rent. Brandon was our only child. We'd wanted more, but life had other plans. Maybe that was our first mistake, pouring all our parental energy into one basket. Daniel had been adamant about not spoiling him, about making Brandon work for things, understand the value of $1. I'd been the softer touch, but not by much. We'd paid for his college, yes, but he'd worked part-time. We'd helped with his first car, but he'd paid half. We thought we'd struck the right balance. He'd married Courtney 5 years ago, and that's when things started shifting. She came from money, old money that her family had squandered through generations of terrible decisions, leaving her with champagne tastes and a beer budget. Suddenly, Brandon was buying designer clothes, taking expensive vacations, dining at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than Daniel and I used to spend on a week's groceries. "Mom, you have to enjoy life," he'd tell me whenever I questioned their spending. "You and Dad were too cautious. Look at all that money just sitting there." He was referring to Daniel's life insurance and our savings, which I'd invested conservatively. After 40 years of Daniel working as an electrical engineer and me teaching high school English, we'd built something comfortable. Not extravagant, but secure. The kind of security that let me sleep at night. That Tuesday, Brandon called around 10 in the morning. "Hey, Mom, I need to grab some documents from your safe. Tax stuff from when Dad and I worked on that rental property project." We did own 2 rental properties together, a duplex and a small commercial space, both in Brandon's name but funded by us as a way to help him build assets. He managed them, collected rent, handled maintenance. It seemed reasonable that he'd need documents. "Sure, honey. When do you want to come by?" "Actually, I'm in the neighborhood. Could I swing by now?" 20 minutes later, he was in my bedroom, and I was giving him the combination. I didn't think twice about it. He was my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised, the man I trusted. He was in the closet for maybe 5 minutes. I was downstairs making coffee, already thinking about the turkey sandwich I'd have for lunch, completely oblivious. "Got what I needed," he called out, heading toward the front door with a folder under his arm. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweetheart. Say hi to Courtney." 3 weeks passed. Normal weeks. I had lunch with my book club on Wednesday. I volunteered at the library on Thursdays. I video chatted with my sister in Oregon over the weekend. Brandon called me once, Tuesday evening, to tell me excitedly that he and Courtney had an opportunity for a last-minute trip to Paris because someone had canceled and they'd gotten an amazing deal. "That sounds wonderful," I'd said, genuinely happy for them. You two deserve a vacation. If only I'd asked how they were paying for it. The truth revealed itself on a Monday afternoon, exactly 21 days after Brandon had accessed my safe. I was looking for my grandmother's pearl necklace because my niece was getting married, and she'd asked if she could borrow something from Grandma Rose for her something old. I opened the safe and immediately felt something was wrong. The cash envelopes were thinner. I counted quickly. $3,000 gone. My hands started shaking as I reached for the jewelry box. Grandma's pearls were still there, thank God. But the velvet box containing my original wedding rings was gone. Completely gone. I stood there for a full minute, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd moved them. Maybe Daniel had put them somewhere else before he died and I'd forgotten. Maybe I was losing my mind. But the missing cash told a different story. I went through the rest of the safe's contents with trembling hands. The deed to the house, still there. Our birth certificates, social security cards, all present. Just the cash and the rings. Items that could be quickly converted to money. My phone showed Brandon's last post on social media. He and Courtney at the Eiffel Tower, her in a designer dress, him in an expensive suit, champagne glasses raised, the caption reading, "Living our best life in the city of light." The trip he'd claimed was a last-minute deal they couldn't pass up. I sat on my bed and did something I hadn't done since Daniel's funeral. I cried. Not gentle tears, but the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and wounded, the kind that shakes your whole body. My son had stolen from me, had violated my trust in the most fundamental way, had taken the symbols of the greatest love I'd ever known and sold them for a vacation. When the tears finally stopped, something else took their place. Something cold and clear and absolutely resolute. I called my lawyer first. Patricia Hartman had handled our estate planning, our wills, the rental property arrangements. She'd known our family for 15 years. Patricia, I need to know exactly what financial connections Brandon has to me, and I need to know how quickly we can sever all of them. There was a pause. Margaret, what's happened? I told her everything. She didn't try to talk me out of what I was planning. She'd been a lawyer too long to believe blood relation guaranteed loyalty. He has access to the family trust as a beneficiary, but he can't withdraw until he's 40 or you pass, whichever comes first. He's 33 now. However, as the trustee, you can remove beneficiaries for cause, and theft absolutely qualifies. The rental properties are in his name, but you're the lien holder since you financed them. You could call those loans due immediately, and obviously, we'll need to revise your will. Do all of it. Everything. Today. Margaret, he's still in Paris. You should wait until... Today, Patricia. I want him to land in a very different world than the one he left. She heard something in my voice that made her stop arguing. I'll draw up the papers within the hour. Come to my office at 4. Next, I called my bank, changed my PIN numbers, my online passwords, reviewed every account for suspicious activity. There was nothing else missing, but I wasn't taking chances. Then I did something that felt both petty and absolutely necessary. I called the detective agency that Daniel's company had used for background checks. I wanted to know exactly where my rings had gone. Mrs. Morrison, finding sold jewelry is difficult unless it went to a pawn shop or known dealer, the detective explained. My son is posting his entire Paris trip on social media. His wife tags every location, every restaurant, every hotel. He's not a criminal mastermind. He probably went to the first jeweler he could find and has the transaction on his credit card statement. I need you to get those statements. That's not exactly legal without his permission. Then I'll get his permission. One way or another, I'm finding out what he did with my rings. By 4 o'clock, I was in Patricia's office, signing papers that would have been unthinkable a few hours earlier. Brandon was out of the will. My estate would go to charity, to my nieces and nephews anywhere but to the son who'd betrayed me. The trust would be restructured to remove him, and the loans on the properties? Due in full within 30 days. This will destroy his financial stability, Patricia warned. Those properties are leveraged. If he can't pay you back, he'll lose them. He should have thought about that before he destroyed mine. The papers I signed included eviction notices to be filed immediately. The rental properties could be sold to satisfy the debt. Brandon's plane was scheduled to land Tuesday evening. I didn't plan to call him. I planned to wait for him to discover what had happened, and when he came crying to me with excuses, I'd be ready with something he'd never heard from me before. Consequences. Brandon called me Wednesday morning, not Tuesday night when he landed, exhausted and jet-lagged. Wednesday, at 11:15 to be precise. Mom, what the hell did you do? No greeting, no, how are you? Just immediate accusation. As if I were the one who'd done something wrong. I was in my garden, wearing Daniel's old work gloves, pulling weeds from the rose beds he'd planted the year before he died. I looked at my phone, saw Brandon's name, and let it ring 3 more times before answering. Hello, Brandon. I just got a letter from Patricia Hartman saying I've been removed from your will and the family trust, and there's an eviction notice on the commercial property. Mom, is this some kind of mistake? No mistake. You stole from me. There are consequences. Silence. Long enough that I almost thought the call had dropped. Then, stole? Mom? What are you talking about? The audacity of him playing dumb made my jaw clench so hard I thought I'd crack a tooth. My wedding rings, Brandon. The original ones from the velvet box in my safe. $3,000 in cash. The items that went missing the same day you needed to get tax documents from my bedroom. I don't. Mom, I didn't take anything from your safe. Then where are my rings? How should I know? Maybe you moved them. Maybe you forgot where you put them. You're getting older and sometimes people... Do not finish that sentence. My voice came out like ice. Do not dare suggest I'm senile when you're the one who sold your mother's wedding rings to fund your little Paris adventure. That's insane. Courtney and I saved for that trip for months. We used our tax refund and... Then you'll have no problem showing me your bank statements and credit card records. You'll have no problem explaining the timeline. You'll have no problem with me hiring a private investigator to track exactly where those rings were sold. Another pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from outrage to something smoother, more careful. This was the Brandon who'd talked his way out of trouble since middle school. Mom, I think you're upset and not thinking clearly. Losing Dad was hard on both of us, and maybe you're projecting some of that grief onto... I hung up. Actually hung up on my own son mid-sentence, something I'd never done in my life. He called back immediately. I declined the call. He called again. Declined. Then the texts started rolling in. Mom, please be reasonable. We need to talk about this like adults. You can't just destroy my financial life over a misunderstanding. Courtney is crying. You're tearing our family apart. That last one almost made me laugh. I was tearing the family apart. Not him. Not the thief. Me, the victim. I blocked his number and went back to my roses. The detective agency called Thursday afternoon. His name was Robert Chen. Wait, no, I remember now. It was Robert Palmer. He had news. Mrs. Morrison, I found the transaction. Your son sold 2 gold wedding bands to Premier Estate Jewelry on Madison Avenue on April 14th. The sale price was $1,800. April 14th, 2 days after he'd accessed my safe. 2 weeks before the Paris trip. $1,800. I repeated the number, feeling sick. Those rings cost $75 total when my husband bought them in 1983. They were worth $1,800 in gold alone now. Actually, ma'am, based on current gold prices and the weight listed in the receipt, they should have been worth closer to $2,800. He got a bad deal, probably because he was in a hurry. My son had sold 40 years of my marriage. the physical symbol of the most important relationship of my life, and he'd gotten ripped off doing it. Somehow that made it worse. Can I get them back? The store sold them to a refiner 3 days later. They've been melted down. I'm sorry. I thanked Robert and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Daniel and I had eaten thousands of meals, where we'd helped Brandon with homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays, and I felt something break inside me that I knew would never fully heal. My rings were gone, not lost, not misplaced, but destroyed, melted into anonymous gold that could be anywhere now, in anyone's jewelry, stripped of every bit of history and meaning they'd carried. I pulled out my laptop and wrote an email to Patricia. Add theft charges to everything else. I want a full accounting of every dollar Brandon owes me, every property I have leverage over, and I want to pursue criminal charges for the theft. If he goes to jail, so be it. He made his choice. Patricia called me within 10 minutes. Margaret, criminal charges against your own son? Are you absolutely certain? He stole from me, melted down my wedding rings for cash, and then lied to my face about it. What part of that doesn't deserve consequences? The prosecutor might not take the case. Family theft is complicated, and you gave him access to the safe. Then I'll make so much noise they'll have to take it. I'll go to every news station, every newspaper. Local son steals dead father's wedding rings to fund Paris vacation. See how that plays for his reputation. I didn't actually plan to go to the media. That would humiliate me as much as him. But I needed Patricia to understand I wasn't backing down. Let me talk to a contact at the DA's office, she said. See what's possible. Friday morning, Courtney showed up at my door. I was eating breakfast when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Courtney's white Mercedes in my driveway, the one with the vanity plate, blessed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. I wanted to hear what possible excuse she'd offer. She was dressed like she was going to brunch at a country club. Designer sundress, expensive sunglasses pushed up on her head, jewelry that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked like someone who'd never faced a real consequence in her life. Margaret, thank you for seeing me. She had the nerve to try to hug me. I stepped back. I didn't invite you. What do you want? Her face fell into an expression I'm sure she thought was contrite. I want to fix this terrible misunderstanding between you and Brandon. There's no misunderstanding. He's a thief. He made a mistake. A terrible, awful mistake that he regrets deeply. So he admits he took the rings? She hesitated, and I watched her recalibrate in real time. He borrowed them. He was going to replace them before you even noticed they were gone. Borrowed. He borrowed my wedding rings and $3,000. The cash was a loan. He was going to pay it back. And the rings. He thought you never looked at them anyway, that they were just sitting in the safe gathering dust, and he needed quick cash for the Paris deposit because our credit cards were maxed and... She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. Your credit cards were maxed, I repeated. So instead of canceling the trip you couldn't afford, you supported my son stealing from his widowed mother. It wasn't like that. Brandon said you had plenty of money, that you were just hoarding it, that his father would have wanted him to enjoy life instead of waiting for some inheritance that might never come. Something white-hot flashed through me. His father would have disowned him for what he did. Daniel worked himself to exhaustion to provide for this family, and Brandon sold his wedding ring like it was scrap metal. Courtney's eyes were tearing up, but I'd taught high school for 30 years. I knew fake tears when I saw them. Margaret, please. Brandon could go to jail. Do you really want that for your only son? The publicity? The shame? The permanent record? He should have thought about that before committing theft. But we'll pay you back, every penny. The cash, the value of the rings, everything. Just drop the charges and undo the will changes and the eviction notices. Please. We're family. Family doesn't steal from family, and those rings can't be replaced. They were melted down, destroyed. 40 years of my marriage, gone forever because your husband needed vacation money. Her expression shifted then. The fake contrition dropped away, replaced by something harder. You know what? Maybe Brandon was right. Maybe you are just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see other people happy. You've been alone for 2 years, and instead of moving on, you're obsessed with dead memories and making everyone else miserable. I opened my front door and pointed outside. Get out of my house. You're going to regret this. You're going to die alone and no one will care because you pushed away the only family you had left. Out. Now. Before I call the police and add trespassing to the list of things I'm documenting, she left in a squeal of tires, her Mercedes kicking up gravel from my driveway. I closed the door and locked it, my hands shaking not from fear but from rage. The weekend passed slowly. I kept myself busy with projects around the house, lunch with my sister over video chat, anything to keep my mind occupied. But Sunday night, alone in the quiet, I let myself cry again. Not for Brandon, but for the relationship I'd thought we had, the son I'd thought I'd raised. Monday morning, Patricia called with an update. The DA is willing to consider charges, but they want to meet with you first. They need to understand the full scope of what happened and determine if prosecution is in the public interest. When? Wednesday at 2. But Margaret, I have to tell you something else. Brandon hired a lawyer. A good one. They're claiming you have diminished capacity due to grief and age, that you gave Brandon permission to access the safe, and are now having regrets and false memories about what was discussed. My laugh was bitter. Of course they are. The missing rings and the Paris trip he couldn't otherwise afford? Just coincidence, I suppose. His lawyer will argue the rings could have been missing for months, that you're misremembering timelines, that the cash was a gift you forgot about. It's not a strong defense, but it's enough to create doubt. Then we'll need proof. Timeline documentation, the jewelry store receipt, his social media posts showing Paris reservations made right after he accessed my safe. Build me an airtight case, Patricia. I'm already on it. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Daniel died. I opened the photo albums from our wedding, from our vow renewal, from 40 years of marriage. There we were, 23 and 24 years old, standing in a tiny chapel with 10 guests and a justice of the peace. Daniel in a borrowed suit and me in a second-hand dress. His ring was too big, mine was too small. We'd had them resized the next week with money from wedding gift checks. In the photos, we looked impossibly young and ridiculously happy. We had no idea what was ahead of us. The struggles, the triumphs, the ordinary, beautiful, boring life we'd build together. And our son had sold that for a vacation he'd already forgotten. Wednesday at 2 o'clock, I sat in Assistant District Attorney Kevin Bradshaw's office with Patricia beside me. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too many family betrayals to be shocked by mine. Mrs. Morrison, I've reviewed the evidence your attorney provided. The timeline is compelling, and the jewelry store receipt with your son's credit card transaction creates a clear connection. But I need to be honest with you about what prosecution looks like in cases like this. Cases like this, I repeated. You mean when the criminal is related to the victim? Exactly. Juries are sympathetic to family dynamics. Defense attorneys paint pictures of misunderstandings, of aging parents who don't remember things clearly, of adult children who had permission they didn't think they needed to formalize. Even with solid evidence, conviction rates in intrafamily theft are under 40%. So you're saying I shouldn't bother? I'm saying you should understand what you're signing up for. This will be public. Your son's attorney will make you look vindictive, bitter, possibly incompetent. They'll bring in experts to testify about grief-induced memory issues. They'll paint your son as a devoted child who made a mistake, and you as a vengeful mother who won't forgive. Patricia touched my arm. Margaret, Kevin's trying to help you make an informed decision. I appreciate that. But here's what I know. My son stole from me. He lied about it. His wife threatened me. And if I don't pursue this, what message does that send? That family can abuse you without consequences? That theft is acceptable if you share DNA? Kevin studied me for a long moment. You're sure about this? Completely. Then I'll file charges. Grand larceny for the cash and the rings combined puts us over the felony threshold. Your son will be arrested, arraigned, and this becomes a matter of public record. If you change your mind later, if you want to drop charges, you'll need to convince me that justice is served by doing so. I won't change my mind. We shook hands. Patricia and I left the building and stood in the parking lot, the afternoon sun too bright for the heaviness of what I'd just set in motion. He'll be arrested within 48 hours, Patricia said. Are you prepared for the fallout? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Brandon was arrested Friday morning at his house. I know because Courtney called me from a number I hadn't blocked, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You had him arrested. The police came to our house. The neighbors saw. You've destroyed his life, you miserable witch. I hung up and blocked that number too. The local paper ran a small story. Local man arrested for grand larceny from elderly mother. The elderly part stung more than I wanted to admit, but the facts were there. Brandon's booking photo, the charges, the bail set at $15,000. My phone started ringing. Friends from book club, former teaching colleagues, neighbors I'd known for decades. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Was I okay? Was there anything they could do? I gave them all the same answer. My son made choices that have consequences. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. I was angry and heartbroken and second-guessing myself at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. Was I destroying my son's life over replaceable objects? Daniel's voice in my head said no. It wasn't about objects. It was about respect and integrity and the fundamental violation of trust. But my mother's voice, softer and more uncertain, asked if I'd regret this when I was dying and Brandon wasn't there. Saturday afternoon, my sister Ellen called from Oregon. I saw the news article online, she said without preamble. Tell me everything. I told her. All of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought maybe the connection had dropped. Ellen? I'm here. Margaret. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago. My stomach dropped. What? 5 years ago, right after Brandon got married, he called me. Asked if I could loan him $20,000 for a down payment on a house. Said you and Daniel were being stingy, that you had plenty of money but refused to help him, that he needed family who actually supported his dreams. We offered to co-sign a mortgage. He said he wanted to do it on his own. That's not the story he told me. He painted you both as misers sitting on a pile of cash while he struggled. I believed him, Margaret. I wired him $15,000, all I had saved. He promised to pay me back within a year. Did he? Not a penny. Every time I brought it up, he had an excuse. Medical bills, car repairs, Courtney's student loans. Eventually, I stopped asking because I felt guilty for pressuring him. But now, hearing what he did to you, I realize he's been running this con for years. I sat down hard on my couch. He stole from you too. And probably from others. You should check with his friends, Daniel's family, anyone he might have had access to. That evening, I made calls. Daniel's brother confirmed Brandon had borrowed $5,000 3 years ago for a business investment that never materialized. An old friend of Brandon's mentioned a $10,000 loan for medical bills that were never explained. My cousin Rachel admitted to giving him $8,000 for a charity fundraiser she later discovered didn't exist. My son hadn't just stolen from me. He'd been systematically defrauding people for years, always with a plausible story, always with the promise of repayment, always targeting people who loved him too much to push back hard. I called Patricia Saturday night. I have more victims. My sister, Daniel's brother, at least 3 others. Brandon's been doing this for years. That changes things. That establishes a pattern. That makes him look less like a son who made a mistake and more like a habitual thief. Can they testify? I'll make sure they will. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In that time, Brandon made bail, thanks to Courtney's parents, and immediately started a social media campaign, painting me as an abusive mother taking revenge for imagined slights. My mother is struggling with grief and mental health issues, he posted on Facebook. Instead of getting her the help she needs, I'm being persecuted for trying to support my family. Please keep us in your prayers during this difficult time. The comments were split. Half called him a liar and a thief. Half expressed sympathy for his situation. I didn't respond. Patricia had forbidden me from engaging in any public discussion of the case, but others responded for me. Ellen posted a detailed account of Brandon's $15,000 loan he never repaid. Daniel's brother posted about his experience. My cousin Rachel shared her story. Within 48 hours, a pattern emerged in public view that Brandon couldn't explain away. His lawyer tried damage control. These were legitimate loans that my client fully intended to repay. The fact that he fell on hard times and couldn't meet those obligations doesn't make him a criminal. Except he hadn't fallen on hard times. His social media was full of expensive dinners, luxury vacations, designer purchases. He wasn't struggling. He was living beyond his means and funding it through theft disguised as loans. The preliminary hearing was in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. I sat behind Patricia, my hands folded in my lap, watching Brandon enter with his lawyer. He didn't look at me. Not once. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the evidence quickly. Mr. Morrison, you accessed your mother's safe under false pretenses and removed items worth approximately $4,800. You then sold those items and used the proceeds for personal expenses. Do you dispute these facts? Brandon's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client believed he had implicit permission to access family assets in times of need. This is a civil matter, a family dispute, not a criminal case. Did your client inform his mother he was taking the items? He didn't feel it was necessary given the family relationship and his mother's comfortable financial position. So that's a no. Proceed with the prosecution's evidence. Kevin Bradshaw laid it out methodically. The safe access date, the jewelry store transaction 2 days later, the Paris trip 2 weeks after that, the melted-down rings that could never be recovered, the pattern of similar thefts from family members over 5 years. Brandon's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, but it fell flat when Ellen testified via video call about her $15,000, and Daniel's brother testified about his $5,000, and the pattern became undeniable. The judge bound Brandon over for trial. This is not a family dispute. This is theft, pure and simple. Trial is set for September 15th. Brandon's bail was increased to $25,000. As we left the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Mrs. Morrison, do you have any regrets about pressing charges against your son? I stopped and looked directly at the camera. I regret that I raised someone who thought stealing from his family was acceptable. I regret that his father isn't here to see what his son became. But I don't regret seeking justice. That quote ran in every local news outlet and several national ones. My phone exploded with messages. Some supportive, some calling me a terrible mother, some sharing their own stories of theft by family members. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Lisa Brennan. Mrs. Morrison, I'm an attorney specializing in elder financial abuse. Your case has brought attention to a growing problem. Adult children stealing from aging parents often face no consequences because victims are too ashamed or too loving to prosecute. Would you be willing to speak publicly about your experience? I called her the next day. What would speaking publicly accomplish? It would give other victims courage to come forward. It would put family thieves on notice that there are consequences. And it would help change the narrative that family theft is somehow less serious than other theft. I'm not looking to become a spokesperson. I understand. But your son didn't just steal from you. He stole from at least 5 family members that we know of. How many others are out there, too ashamed to admit what happened? Your willingness to prosecute is already making waves. Imagine what you could do by sharing your full story. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called Lisa back. I'll do it, but on my terms. I want to make clear that this isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. 2 weeks later, I sat for an interview with a national morning show. The host was professional, but clearly fascinated by the story. You're prosecuting your only son. Some viewers will wonder if you've considered reconciliation, forgiveness. I've considered it deeply, but forgiveness doesn't mean accepting theft. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. My son made deliberate choices. He stole from me, from my sister, from multiple family members. He showed no remorse until he faced consequences. That's not someone who deserves forgiveness without accountability. What would you say to other families dealing with similar situations? Don't protect thieves just because you share DNA. Family relationships should be based on respect and trust, not on the assumption that love means tolerating abuse. If my story helps even one person find the courage to set boundaries, then going through this publicly was worth it. The interview aired on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, it had been viewed over 2 million times online. Messages poured in from people thanking me for speaking out, sharing their own stories of family theft and betrayal, expressing support. But there were also messages from Brandon's supporters, people who believed I was a vindictive witch destroying my son's life. Death threats even, which I reported to the police but tried not to take seriously. Friday evening, Patricia called. Brandon's lawyer reached out. They want to discuss a plea deal. I met with Patricia and Kevin Bradshaw Monday morning to discuss the proposed plea agreement. Brandon's lawyer had drafted something that made my blood pressure spike just reading it. Misdemeanor theft, 6 months probation, restitution of $4,800, no jail time. I read aloud. This is a joke. Kevin nodded. It's a standard opening offer. They're hoping you'll be tired of the fight and accept something that makes this go away quietly. I'm not tired. Counteroffer? We push for the felony to stand. 2 years minimum sentence, full restitution to all victims including your sister and Daniel's brother, mandatory financial counseling, and a restraining order preventing him from contacting you or accessing any property you own. Can we get that? With the pattern evidence and the preliminary hearing outcome, yes. His lawyer knows the trial won't go well for Brandon. Multiple victims, clear premeditation, social media posts showing lavish spending right after the thefts. A jury will convict. Patricia leaned forward. Margaret, before you decide, I need you to understand what a felony conviction means for Brandon. He'll lose professional licenses if he has any. Finding employment will be difficult. It follows him forever. He should have thought about that before he became a thief. I know. I just need you to be certain. Because once we counter with these terms, we're committed. No going back. I thought about Daniel. What would he want? He'd been tough on Brandon when he needed it, loving when he deserved it, always trying to teach him to be better. But even Daniel had his limits. He'd once told Brandon, after catching him in a lie at age 16, I can forgive a lot, but I can't forgive someone who refuses to learn. Brandon had been given a chance to learn. He'd been arrested, arraigned, exposed publicly. He could have shown remorse, could have apologized, could have tried to make amends. Instead, he'd attacked me on social media and played the victim. Send the counteroffer, I said. 2 days later, Brandon's lawyer rejected it. They wouldn't accept a felony or jail time. We were going to trial. The next 2 months were a blur of preparation. Witness interviews, evidence review, strategy sessions. Kevin built a case that was methodical and damning. The jewelry store receipt. Brandon's bank records showing the deposit. The Paris hotel reservation made the day after the deposit. Social media posts geotagged in Paris during the exact dates. Testimony from Ellen, from Daniel's brother, from my cousin Rachel, all establishing a pattern. Brandon's defense strategy became clear during discovery. They were claiming I had given him permission to sell the rings because I'd told him they were just sitting in the safe gathering dust, and that I wanted him to enjoy life. They'd found a neighbor who would testify that I'd seemed confused lately, forgetting names and repeating stories. It was garbage, but it was the best they had. The trial started on September 15th, a Tuesday morning that felt like the longest day of my life. The courtroom was packed. Media, curious locals, some of Brandon's friends, some of mine. Courtney sat behind Brandon, dabbing her eyes with tissues in a performance I found insulting. Kevin's opening statement was straightforward. This is a case about theft, pure and simple. The defendant accessed his mother's safe under false pretenses, stole cash and irreplaceable jewelry, sold those items for personal gain, and then lied about it when caught. The evidence will show a pattern of similar behavior toward other family members, establishing that this was not a misunderstanding, but a calculated crime. Brandon's lawyer, a man named Jeffrey Winters with expensive suits and a practiced smile, painted a different picture. This is a case about a family tragedy. A grieving widow, struggling with loss, who gave her son permission to access family assets and now, in her grief and confusion, has convinced herself that permission was theft. My client loved his mother, wanted to help her, and is now being punished for being a devoted son. I wanted to throw something at him. The prosecution went first. Kevin called the jewelry store owner, who testified that Brandon had sold 2 gold wedding bands on April 14th for $1,800, that Brandon had been alone, that he'd seemed nervous and in a hurry. Did he provide any documentation proving ownership? Kevin asked. No, we don't require it for items under $5,000, but he did show ID, and he signed the transaction receipt. Kevin entered the receipt into evidence, with Brandon's signature clear as day. Next came the detective, Robert Palmer, who walked through the timeline. The safe access on April 12th. The jewelry sale on April 14th. The Paris hotel charge on April 15th. The flight on April 27th. In your professional opinion, is this timeline consistent with theft, followed by immediate use of the stolen funds? Absolutely. The pattern is textbook. Access. Liquidate. Spend. Then came Ellen, testifying about her $15,000. She was credible, detailed, angry. The jury paid attention. Daniel's brother testified. My cousin Rachel testified. By the end of day 1, a pattern had been established that Brandon's lawyer couldn't easily dismiss. Day 2 started with my testimony. I was nervous in a way I hadn't expected, my hands shaking as I was sworn in. Kevin walked me through everything gently. The morning Brandon asked for safe access. The discovery 3 weeks later. The investigation. The confrontation. Mrs. Morrison, did you ever give your son permission to take your wedding rings? Never. Those rings represented 40 years of marriage to my late husband. I would never have allowed anyone to take them, let alone sell them. Did you tell your son the rings were just gathering dust, or suggest he should sell them? Absolutely not. They were precious to me, irreplaceable. Brandon's lawyer cross-examined me aggressively, trying to rattle me. Mrs. Morrison, you're 64 years old. Your husband died 2 years ago. Isn't it possible that in your grief, you're misremembering conversations with your son? No. You've stated you were struggling with your husband's death. Depression can affect memory, can it? I wasn't depressed. I was grieving. There's a difference, and my memory is fine. But you didn't notice the rings were missing for 3 weeks. Doesn't that suggest you weren't really paying attention to their whereabouts? I trusted my son. I didn't think I needed to inventory my safe after he accessed it because I didn't think he'd steal from me. That was naive, but it doesn't mean I gave him permission. He tried for another 20 minutes to shake me, but I held firm. I'd been a high school teacher for 3 decades. I'd faced down hostile teenagers, angry parents, difficult administrators. One slick lawyer didn't intimidate me. Day 3 of the trial brought Brandon's defense. They called character witnesses, friends who testified that Brandon was generous and kind, that he'd always spoken lovingly about his mother, that he couldn't possibly be a thief. It might have been effective if Kevin hadn't been prepared. Mr. Watkins, you testified that Brandon Morrison is generous. Did you know that he borrowed $10,000 from a mutual friend 3 years ago for medical bills and never paid it back? The witness hesitated. No, I didn't know that. Did you know that his aunt loaned him $15,000 5 years ago that he never repaid? I wasn't aware. So your testimony about his character is based on limited information, correct? I guess so. Each character witness crumbled under cross-examination as Kevin revealed facts they didn't know, painting Brandon not as the generous friend they believed, but as someone who showed different faces to different people. Then Courtney took the stand. She was dressed conservatively, a far cry from her usual designer outfits, clearly trying to appear sympathetic. Mrs. Morrison, tell us about your relationship with your mother-in-law. It's always been strained. Margaret never approved of me, never thought I was good enough for Brandon. She was controlling, demanding. And when Daniel died, she got worse. Worse how? She'd call Brandon at all hours, demanding he come over for trivial things. She'd criticize our spending, our choices, everything. She was obsessed with Daniel's memory and expected Brandon to be a replacement husband. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was seething. I'd called Brandon maybe once a week. I'd never criticized their spending to their faces, though I'd certainly questioned it privately. And the idea that I wanted Brandon to replace Daniel was so absurd, it would have been laughable if it wasn't being used to destroy my credibility. Did Margaret ever discuss the wedding rings with you? Yes. She said they were in the safe, but that she never looked at them, that they were just a reminder of what she'd lost. She seemed almost resentful of them. Did she ever suggest they should be sold? She said Daniel would want Brandon to enjoy life, not wait for her to die to inherit. She talked about how they'd struggled when they were young, and how she didn't want Brandon to struggle the same way. It was a well-crafted lie, specific enough to sound plausible but completely false. Kevin's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Morrison, you testified that your mother-in-law was controlling and critical. Did she know about your maxed-out credit cards? Courtney's eyes widened slightly. I don't see how that's relevant. Please answer the question. No, our finances weren't her business. Did she know that you and your husband were living beyond your means, spending money on luxury vacations and designer items while borrowing from family members? We weren't borrowing. Those were gifts. Gifts that your husband promised to repay? Sometimes family helps family. That doesn't make it borrowing. Did you accompany your husband to the jewelry store where he sold his mother's wedding rings? No. Did you know he'd taken them? A pause. Too long. He said he had permission. That's not what I asked. Did you know he'd taken rings from his mother's safe? He told me he'd gotten some family jewelry to sell, and you didn't question where he'd gotten it or whether he had permission. I trusted my husband. You trusted him enough to use the proceeds for a Paris vacation, but not enough to verify he'd obtained the jewelry legally? Objection, Brandon's lawyer called out. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said. But the point had been made. When Courtney stepped down, she looked shaken. Kevin had exposed her as, at best, willfully ignorant, and at worst, complicit. Finally, Brandon took the stand. It was a risky move, but his lawyer clearly thought it was necessary. Brandon looked nervous, younger than his 33 years, like a boy caught in a lie. His lawyer walked him through a carefully crafted story. He'd been under financial stress. His mother had mentioned the rings were just sitting there. He'd interpreted her comments as implicit permission. He'd fully intended to replace them before she noticed. It was a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. "Brandon, did you steal from your mother?" "No. I made a mistake in judgment, but I didn't steal. I thought I had permission." "Do you regret what happened?" "Every day. I miss my mom. I wish I could take it all back." His performance was decent. He even managed a few tears. But then Kevin stood up for cross-examination, and everything fell apart. "Mr. Morrison, you testified that you thought you had permission to take the rings. Did you ask your mother directly if you could take them?" "No, but she'd implied." "Yes or no? Did you ask?" "No." "Did you tell her you were taking them?" "No." "Did you tell her you were selling them?" "No." "Did you tell her you were using the money for a Paris vacation?" "No." "So you took items from her safe without asking, sold them without telling her, and used the money without her knowledge. How is that not theft?" "Because I plan to replace them." "When?" "You've had 5 months since the trip. Have you replaced them?" "They were melted down. I couldn't." "Have you offered to pay your mother back the value of the rings plus the $3,000 in cash?" "I don't have that kind of money right now." "But you had money for Paris, money for designer clothes, money for expensive restaurants. You've had money for luxuries, but not for restitution." Brandon's jaw tightened. "My income is my business. Your theft from your mother is the court's business. Let's talk about the other family members you borrowed from. Your Aunt Ellen. Did you pay her back the $15,000? Not yet. Your uncle, $5,000. Paid back? No. Your mother's cousin, $8,000 for a charity that didn't exist. Paid back? It was for a charity. It just didn't work out." Kevin pulled out bank records. "These are your bank statements from that time period. Can you show me any payments to any charity?" I'd have to check my records." "You don't have records, do you?" "Because there was no charity. You stole $8,000 by lying about a cause that didn't exist. That's not fair. I made mistakes, but I'm not a criminal. You stole from your mother. You stole from your aunt. You stole from your uncle. You stole from your cousin. You lied to all of them, betrayed their trust, and used their money for your own pleasure. If that doesn't make you a criminal, what does?" Brandon had no answer. He looked at his lawyer, at the judge, anywhere but at me or the jury. His face was red, his hands shaking. "No further questions," Kevin said. The defense rested. Closing arguments were scheduled for the next morning. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying Brandon's testimony, his inability to answer Kevin's questions, the way he'd looked everywhere except at me. Part of me, a small part I didn't want to acknowledge, felt sorry for him. He looked broken up there, exposed, ashamed. But then, I'd remember the empty velvet box, the melted rings, the lies, and the sympathy would evaporate. Closing arguments started at 9 the next morning. The courtroom was even more packed than before, people sensing that this was the final act. Jeffrey Winters went first for the defense. He was polished, persuasive, doing his best with a bad hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a family in crisis. A mother grieving her husband, a son trying to navigate his mother's grief while building his own life. A terrible misunderstanding that escalated because of pride and pain on both sides. Brandon Morrison is not a criminal. He's a son who made a mistake, who misread his mother's intentions, who acted without malice or intent to permanently deprive her of anything. The prosecution wants you to believe he's a calculating thief, but the evidence shows something else. It shows a family that's broken, communication that failed, and a mother who, in her grief, turned a family matter into a criminal case. Don't let the state destroy this family further. Find Brandon not guilty and give this family a chance to heal." It was a good speech. I could see a few jurors nodding slightly. But then Kevin stood up, and I knew why he had a 90% conviction rate. The defense wants you to believe this is a misunderstanding. Let's look at what actually happened. On April 12th, Brandon Morrison asked his mother for access to her safe under the pretense of getting tax documents. He didn't mention the rings. He didn't mention the cash. 2 days later, he sold those rings at a jewelry store for $1,800. He didn't tell his mother. The next day, he used that money to book a hotel in Paris. 2 weeks later, he flew to Paris with his wife for a luxury vacation funded by theft. 3 weeks after that, when his mother discovered the missing items and confronted him, he lied. He claimed he hadn't taken anything. He suggested his 64-year-old mother was confused, forgetful, possibly senile. Only when faced with irrefutable evidence did he change his story to, "I thought I had permission." That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft, followed by lies, followed by more lies. And it's not an isolated incident. You heard from his aunt, who loaned him $15,000 he never repaid. His uncle, $5,000. His cousin, $8,000 for a fake charity. This is a pattern. This is who Brandon Morrison is. A man who takes from people who love him and then plays the victim when he's caught. Don't let him manipulate you the way he manipulated his family. Find him guilty, because he is. The jury was dismissed to deliberate at 11:30. Patricia and I went to a nearby coffee shop to wait, though I couldn't drink anything. My stomach was in knots. "How long do you think?" I asked. "Could be hours. Could be days. There's no way to predict." It took 4 hours. At 3:45, we got the call that the jury had reached a verdict. Back in the courtroom, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Brandon looked pale, his hands clasped on the table in front of him. Courtney was crying quietly behind him. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "On the count of grand larceny, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Brandon's head dropped. Courtney let out a sob. I felt nothing for a moment, just a strange emptiness, and then a wave of relief so intense I thought I might faint. Guilty. My son was guilty. Not in my mind, not in my accusations, but in the eyes of the law, proven beyond a reasonable doubt by 12 impartial citizens. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later and remanded Brandon to custody pending sentencing. He was led out in handcuffs, still not looking at me, and I watched him go, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and loss. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Mrs. Morrison, how do you feel about the verdict?" "I feel that justice was served. My son committed a crime, and he's being held accountable." "Do you have any message for other families dealing with similar situations?" "Trust is precious. Don't let anyone, family or not, take advantage of your love and trust, and if they do, don't be afraid to seek justice. Will you ever reconcile with your son?" That question stopped me. Would I? Could I? That depends entirely on whether he takes responsibility for what he did, shows genuine remorse, and makes amends. Real amends, not just words. Until then, no. The sentencing hearing was on October 8th. Brandon's lawyer presented a case for leniency. First-time offender, gainfully employed, supportive family, willing to make restitution. He'd brought letters from friends and employers testifying to Brandon's character. Kevin countered with the pattern evidence. Multiple victims. No remorse. Lavish spending while claiming inability to repay. A defendant who only apologized after being convicted. The judge, the same no-nonsense woman from the preliminary hearing, listened to both sides and then addressed Brandon directly. "Mr. Morrison, you were given every advantage in life, loving parents who provided for you, an education, opportunities, and you repaid their generosity by stealing from them and from other family members who trusted you. You didn't steal out of desperation or need. You stole to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. You showed no remorse until you were caught, and even then, Your remorse seems to be for your situation, not for your victims. This court sentences you to 3 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months contingent on full restitution to all victims and completion of financial counseling. You are also ordered to pay $4,800 in restitution to your mother, $15,000 to your aunt, $5,000 to your uncle, and $8,000 to your cousin, plus court costs and fees. Do you understand this sentence? Brandon, standing with his lawyer, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything to say? He turned and looked at me for the first time since the trial started. His eyes were red, his face drawn. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I looked back at him, this man I'd raised, and felt nothing but sadness. I wish I could believe that. He was taken into custody immediately. Courtney left the courtroom without speaking to anyone, and I walked out into the October sunshine feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than I'd ever felt. The months following Brandon's sentencing were strange. The media attention faded. Life returned to a new kind of normal. I went to book club, volunteered at the library, tended Daniel's roses. But everything felt different now, colored by betrayal and loss. Ellen visited in November, flying out from Oregon to spend Thanksgiving with me. We'd always been close, but this experience had bonded us in a new way. "How are you really doing?" she asked over coffee in my kitchen. "I don't know. Some days I feel strong, like I did the right thing and I'd do it again. Other days I wonder if I destroyed my son's life over rings and money that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things." They mattered. They represented Daniel. They represented your marriage. Brandon took something irreplaceable and treated it like garbage. I know, but he's still my son. Still the baby I held, the boy I raised, the person I thought would be there when I'm old and dying. He chose not to be that person. You didn't make that choice. He did. She was right, but it didn't make it hurt less. Christmas was hard. My first Christmas truly alone, without Daniel, without Brandon. Ellen invited me to Oregon, but I declined. I needed to face this, to sit with the grief and loneliness and come out the other side. I put up a small tree, mostly because not putting one up felt like letting Brandon's actions steal even more from me. I baked cookies and took them to neighbors. I video chatted with my nieces and nephews, their children opening presents and squealing with joy, reminding me that life continued even when mine felt suspended. In January, I got a letter from Brandon. It had been forwarded through Patricia because I'd maintained the restraining order preventing him from contacting me directly. "Mom," it started. No dear, no preamble, just Mom. "I've had a lot of time to think in here, about what I did, about who I became, about the choices that led me to this place. My lawyer told me not to write this letter, that anything I say could be used against me in some way. But I don't care anymore. I need you to know that I understand now. I stole from you. Not borrowed, not misunderstood, but stole. I took something irreplaceable and destroyed it for something as meaningless as a vacation I barely remember. I lied to you, to myself, to everyone. I blamed you for being vindictive when really you were just holding me accountable for something I should never have done. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry in a way I wasn't before. Prison has a way of stripping away the excuses and the lies you tell yourself. I see clearly now what I couldn't see before. I was entitled, selfish, and cruel. You raised me better than that, and I failed you. I failed Dad. I failed myself. I'm working on being better. I've been taking classes here, learning about financial management, about accountability, about the patterns of behavior that led me here. I've been working in the prison library and saving every penny I earn toward restitution. It'll take years to pay everyone back, but I'm committed to doing it. I'm not asking you to write back. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that you were right to do what you did. I needed consequences. I needed to face what I'd become. Thank you for loving me enough to not let me get away with it. Your son, Brandon. I read that letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and tried to decide if I believed it. February brought a surprise. Courtney filed for divorce. According to Patricia, who heard it from Brandon's lawyer, she'd met someone else, someone with money, and had no interest in waiting for a convicted felon to get out of prison. Brandon's accounts were seized for restitution, the rental properties sold to cover the debts. Courtney took everything that wasn't legally protected. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd known she was in it for the lifestyle, not for love. But mostly I just felt sad that Brandon had lost everything for someone who'd never really cared about him. In March, Ellen called with news. Brandon's been making payments. $500 showed up in my account last week with a note. Restitution, first of many. Did you get one too? I checked my bank account. There it was. $500 from an automated prison payment system with a notation. Brandon Morrison, restitution payment 1 of 96. 96 payments. That was 8 years of monthly payments to pay me back alone, not counting what he owed the others. He's serious, Ellen said. This isn't a gesture. He's actually doing it. Or his lawyer told him it'll look good for parole. Maybe. But $500 a month from prison wages? That's basically everything he earns. That's not for show. I didn't know what to feel about it. The money didn't matter to me. The rings couldn't be replaced. But the fact that he was trying, that he was sacrificing, that he was following through, that meant something. In June, 9 months after the conviction, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I accepted a visitor pass to see Brandon in prison. Patricia thought I was making a mistake. Ellen supported me, but warned me to be careful. I just knew I needed to see him face to face, to look him in the eye and determine if the letter had been genuine or just another manipulation. The prison was depressing in the way all prisons are. Gray walls, harsh lighting, the smell of industrial cleaner and hopelessness. Brandon looked different. Thinner. Older. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something harder, but also more honest. We sat across from each other at a metal table, a guard watching from 20 feet away. "You came," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I got your letter. And the payments. I meant what I wrote. Every word. I want to believe that. But you've lied to me so many times, Brandon. How do I know this isn't just another performance?" He looked down at his hands, which were folded on the table. "You don't. I can't prove it with words. I can only prove it with time and actions. But Mom, I need you to know something. Being in here, losing everything, it was the best thing that could have happened to me." I must have looked skeptical because he laughed bitterly. "I know how that sounds, but it's true. I was on a path to destroy my entire life. I was living in a fantasy, funded by theft and lies, and I would have kept going until there was nothing left. You stopped me. You held me accountable when no one else would, and I hated you for it at first. I blamed you for everything. But slowly, I started to see. This isn't your fault. It's mine. Every bit of it." "What about Courtney?" I asked. "She filed for divorce. I don't blame her. I have nothing to offer her now, and she was never in it for the right reasons anyway. I see that now too. Do you?" "Mom, I married someone who valued things over character. What does that say about me? I became someone who valued things over character. You and Dad raised me better, but I threw it all away for designer clothes and Instagram likes, and a lifestyle I couldn't afford." We talked for an hour. About his classes, his work in the library, his cellmate who was teaching him to play chess. About the realization he'd had that he'd spent his entire adult life trying to look successful instead of actually being successful. about the regret that kept him awake at night. When visiting time ended, I stood to leave. "Mom," he said, "do you think, someday, could we maybe?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Ask me again in a few years, after I see who you become." He nodded, accepting that. "That's fair." I left the prison feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the possibility of it, someday, if he kept his promises. Brandon was released on parole in March, 2 years after I'd discovered the empty velvet box. He'd served 18 months, earned time for good behavior and completion of his rehabilitation programs, and made consistent restitution payments. He'd paid back about $12,000 total, split between all his victims. He didn't call me when he was released. He didn't show up at my door. He sent a single text message through Patricia. "I'm out, living in a halfway house, working at a warehouse, continuing payments. I hope you're well." I appreciated that. The restraint, the respect for boundaries, the lack of expectation. Summer came and went. I turned 66. Ellen visited again. Life continued its quiet rhythm. The payments kept coming, $500 every month, regular as clockwork. In September, 3 years after the trial, Brandon asked through Patricia if he could visit me. Not at my house, not anywhere that would make me uncomfortable, but somewhere public if I was willing. I thought about it for a week. Then I agreed. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a Wednesday afternoon. He looked different again. Older, but in a good way. More settled in himself. He'd gained back some weight, but it was muscle from the warehouse work. His clothes were simple, clean, nothing designer. He looked like someone who'd been through fire and come out changed. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting across from me. He didn't try to hug me or touch me. He kept a respectful distance. "You asked nicely, and you've kept your promises about the payments. I'll keep making them until every penny is repaid. It's going to take years, but I'm committed." We ordered coffee, made small talk. He told me about his warehouse job, his apartment he'd finally been able to afford after leaving the halfway house, his continued therapy and financial counseling. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone. He opened a photo of a small velvet box. My breath caught. "Those aren't..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "No, they're not yours. Those are gone, and I have to live with that. But I've been working with a jeweler, and I've been saving. These are replicas, as close as I could get based on photographs from your wedding album and the description from the jewelry store receipt. They're not the same. They can never be the same. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to give back something, even if it can only ever be a shadow of what I took." I looked at the photo. 2 simple gold bands, scratched and worn to look aged, sized correctly. They looked almost identical to the ones Daniel and I had worn for 25 years. "I don't want to just hand them to you," he said. "That feels wrong, like I'm trying to make a gesture and call it even. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, they're yours. No conditions, no expectations. Just me trying to replace something irreplaceable." I looked at this man, my son, who'd stolen from me and lied to me and betrayed everything I'd thought he was. But I also saw someone who'd faced consequences, accepted responsibility, and spent 3 years working to make amends. "I'm not ready," I said, "but maybe someday." "That's fair. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you think there's any chance, any possibility, that we could have some kind of relationship again? Not like before. I know that's gone. But something. Even just coffee twice a year. I don't want to be entitled about it. I don't deserve anything from you. But I miss you. I miss having a mother." I thought about Daniel, about what he would want. And I realized that he would want me to be honest, to set boundaries, to protect myself, but also to leave the door open for genuine change. "Here's what I'll offer," I said. We can meet like this, in public, once every few months. You can tell me about your life, show me you're staying on track. If you keep making restitution, keep going to therapy, keep being honest, then maybe over time we can build something new. Not what we had before. That's dead, but something different. Something based on who you are now, not who you were. His eyes were wet. I'll take it. Thank you. But if you lie to me again, if you steal from anyone, if you go back to your old patterns, we're done. Permanently. No second chances. Understood. I won't. I promise. Don't promise. Just do it. We finished our coffee and parted ways. I watched him walk to his bus stop. This man who'd been my baby, my little boy, the person who'd destroyed 40 years of memories for a vacation he couldn't afford. I didn't know if we'd ever truly reconcile. I didn't know if he'd stay on the path he was on or fall back into old patterns. But I knew that I'd done what I needed to do. I'd held him accountable. I'd refused to enable him. I'd set boundaries and enforced consequences. And in doing so, I'd given him the only thing that could actually help him. The truth about who he'd become, and the opportunity to choose to be better. 6 months later, in March, Brandon showed up at my door. I almost didn't open it, remembering the restraining order that had finally been lifted at his parole completion. But something made me look through the window first. He was holding a box. Not a small jewelry box, but a wooden box, handmade, beautiful. I opened the door. I made this in a woodworking class, he said. For you. It's a memory box, for photos of Dad, for the replica rings when you're ready for them, for anything you want to keep safe. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to have something I made with my own hands, something that represents the person I'm trying to become. I took the box. It was beautiful, oak with brass hinges, my name carved into the lid. Thank you, I said. There's something else, he said. I've been accepted into a community college, business program. I want to learn to do things right this time. Build something legitimate. Make Dad proud, even if it's too late for him to see it. I looked at my son, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but hope. Come in, I said. I made cookies this morning. We can have coffee. He looked shocked. Really? Don't make me regret it. He came in, and we sat at the kitchen table where Daniel and I had sat for 40 years, and we talked. Really talked. About his goals, about his mistakes, about the life he was trying to build. It wasn't like before. It might never be like before. But it was something. A beginning, fragile and tentative, but real. And that was enough.